Montana Territory, 1885. The unforgiving plains stretched before Cole Fitzgerald like an ocean of grass, broken only by distant mountains that cut into the sky like the jagged teeth of a slumbering beast. The 25-year-old cowboy rode alone, as he had for the past 3 years since leaving his family's failing ranch in Texas. His stallion, Midnight, moved with practiced ease across the terrain, hooves pounding a steady rhythm that matched the beating of Cole's heart, constant, reliable, and utterly solitary. Cole had convinced himself that solitude was the only true companion a man could count on in these untamed lands. The frontier was no place for tender feelings or lasting connections; such things were luxuries that got men killed. He'd seen it happen: ranchers who grew soft protecting wives and children, riders who risked everything for sweethearts who eventually left them broken. No, he told himself for the 1,000th time, a man survived out here by depending on himself, his horse, and his Colt revolver, nothing more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Cole topped a gentle rise. He removed his worn Stetson, revealing sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, and wiped sweat from his brow. His face was young but weathered from constant exposure to sun and wind, his jawline strong beneath a 2-day stubble. Though only 25, his clear blue eyes carried the wariness of a man who'd seen too much too soon. "Easy, boy," he murmured to Midnight as the horse's ears pricked forward. Cole followed his mount's gaze to the valley below and spotted what had caught the animal's attention: a wagon, listing dangerously to one side where a wheel had collapsed. Even from this distance, he could see a figure moving frantically around the disabled vehicle. His first instinct was to turn away. Whatever troubles plagued the traveler below weren't his concern. He was 3 days from Cottonwood Creek, where a cattle-driving job awaited, good money that would see him through the coming winter. Getting involved in another person's misfortune was a distraction he couldn't afford. Yet something made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the memory of his father's voice: "A man's character is judged by what he does when no one's watching." Or maybe it was the vulnerability of that lone figure on the vast prairie that reminded him of his own precarious existence. With a resigned sigh, Cole replaced his hat and nudged Midnight toward the stranded wagon. "Just a quick look," he muttered to himself, "then we'll be on our way." As he approached, Cole realized the traveler was a young woman. She was attempting to lift the wagon's corner high enough to examine the broken wheel, a futile effort given the vehicle's weight. Her dress, once a cheerful blue calico, was smudged with dust and sweat. Long honey-blonde hair had come loose from its pins and fell in waves around her shoulders as she struggled with the impossible task. "You'll strain something trying to lift that on your own, ma'am," Cole called out when he was within earshot. The woman spun around, startled by his voice. Her hand moved instinctively to her side where Cole spotted the outline of a small derringer. Smart woman, he thought. Trust came at a premium out here. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said, raising one hand while keeping the other visible on his saddle horn. "Just passing by and saw you might need assistance." She studied him with wary green eyes, assessing the danger he might pose. Whatever she saw in his face must have reassured her, for her shoulders relaxed slightly though her hand remained near the hidden gun. "The wheel split when I hit that rut," she explained, gesturing to a deep depression in the trail. "I've got a spare, but I can't lift the wagon to change it." Cole dismounted, keeping his movements slow and unthreatening. "Cole Fitzgerald," he offered, touching the brim of his hat. "I can help with that wheel if you'd like." "Josephine Stewart," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "I'd be grateful for the assistance, Mr. Fitzgerald." As Cole moved closer, he was struck by Josephine's beauty. She couldn't have been more than 21 or 22, with a delicate face kissed by freckles across the bridge of her nose. Her eyes, a clear emerald green, regarded him with intelligence and a wariness that matched his own. Despite the dirt on her traveling clothes, there was an unmistakable refinement to her bearing. "You're traveling alone?" he asked, already searching for the wagon jack as he spoke. "I am now," she answered cryptically, and something in her tone warned against further questioning. Cole located the jack and spare wheel beneath the wagon and set to work. "This is rough country for a woman on her own," he ventured, positioning the jack carefully. "I've managed this far," Josephine replied. Her voice carried a hint of something, pride perhaps, or defiance. "And I'll manage the rest of the way to Helena." Helena, Cole paused in his labor. That's still a good 100 miles north. I'm aware of the distance, Mr. Fitzgerald. There was a gentle firmness in her response. I have business there that can't wait. Cole nodded and returned to his task, respecting her privacy even as questions multiplied in his mind. Why was this clearly well-bred young woman traveling alone through Montana territory? What business could be so urgent, and what had happened to whoever had accompanied her when her journey began? As he worked, the sun began its final descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The broken wheel had been damaged beyond repair, splintered where it had struck the rut. By the time he had secured the spare in its place, dusk was gathering around them. That should hold, Cole said, wiping his hands on his bandana. But it's getting dark. You shouldn't travel these trails at night. Josephine glanced at the darkening sky, then back to him. He could see her weighing her options, calculating the risks of trusting a stranger against traveling in darkness. I can make camp here, she finally said. I've done it before. Alone, Cole raised an eyebrow. These parts have been seeing increased activity from the Blackfoot, not to mention wolves and the occasional drifter with bad intentions. A flash of fear crossed her face before she mastered it. Are you offering protection, Mr. Fitzgerald? I'm suggesting we make camp together, he clarified. Safety in numbers. I'll be on my way at first light and you can continue to Helena. Josephine considered him again, and Cole wondered what she saw. A dusty cowboy with calloused hands and a weathered face, a potential threat, or someone offering genuine help. Very well, she conceded. I accept your offer. They made camp efficiently, with Cole gathering firewood while Josephine prepared a simple meal from her provisions: beans, salt pork, and surprisingly, fresh biscuits she'd apparently baked that morning at her last stop. As flames licked at the gathering darkness, they sat across from each other, the fire between them both a division and a connection. These biscuits are better than anything I've had in months, Cole admitted after his first bite. A smile touched Josephine's lips, transforming her face. My mother taught me. She said a woman should know how to make biscuits that would bring a man to his knees. Your mother was wise, Cole replied, then felt his face warm at the inadvertent compliment. To cover his discomfort, he asked, Where are you from originally, Miss Stewart? Boston, she answered, and something in her voice shifted. My father was a merchant, very successful until last year's financial panic. She poked at the fire with a stick. He didn't survive the strain of losing everything. Cole nodded, understanding loss all too well. I'm sorry. And you, Mr. Fitzgerald, where do you call home? Nowhere in particular, he replied, the familiar answer coming easily to his lips. Texas originally, but I've been moving through the territories these past few years, following the seasons and the work. No family, she pressed gently. Cole hesitated, unused to speaking of personal matters. Parents passed on. Sister married to a shopkeeper in San Antonio, he shrugged. The open country suits me better than four walls ever did. They fell silent, the crackling fire and distant coyote calls the only sounds in the gathering night. Cole found himself studying Josephine when she wasn't looking, the way the firelight caught the gold in her hair, how her hands moved with graceful efficiency. There was a story there, deeper than what she'd shared. A Boston merchant's daughter didn't simply appear alone in Montana territory without reason. Why Helena? He asked finally. Josephine's gaze remained fixed on the flames. My uncle, my father's brother. He came west years ago and established himself in the mining business. When father died, he wrote offering me a position as governess to his children. She looked up then, her eyes reflecting the dancing fire. It was either that or marry Mr. Hollister, my father's former business partner, a man 3 times my age who kindly offered to settle father's debts in exchange for my hand. The bitterness in her voice told Cole all he needed to know about that arrangement. So you chose the frontier instead, he observed. I chose freedom, she corrected him, and there was such fierce determination in those 3 words that Cole felt something shift inside him, an admiration unexpected and unwelcome for this woman's courage. It's not an easy life out here, he warned, though he wasn't entirely sure why he felt compelled to do so. No life worth living comes easily, Mr. Fitzgerald. Her eyes met his directly. I'd rather face honest dangers than live in a gilded cage. Those words stayed with Cole long after they had extinguished the fire and retired to their respective sleeping arrangements, Josephine in her wagon and Cole beneath it, his rifle close at hand. As he stared up at the wagon's underside, he pondered the woman sleeping just feet above him. She possessed a kind of bravery he'd rarely encountered, especially in those raised in Eastern comfort. Perhaps the frontier didn't just attract the rootless and the desperate, perhaps it also called to those with something to prove to themselves if no one else. He fell asleep wondering what it would be like to have such clear purpose. Morning arrived with pearly light and a fine mist that would burn away once the sun climbed higher. Cole awakened to the smell of coffee and found Josephine already up, tending a small breakfast fire. Her hair was neatly pinned again, her dress changed to a serviceable brown traveling outfit. "You didn't have to do that," he said, nodding toward the steaming pot. "Consider it payment for your assistance," she replied. "I don't like leaving debts unsettled." They ate a quick breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with molasses. Cole checked the repaired wheel once more and ensured her team of 2 sturdy mares was properly hitched and ready for travel. "You should reach the Wilson Creek trading post by nightfall if you make good time," he advised, preparing to mount midnight. "It's safer than camping alone again." Josephine nodded, then extended her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald." Not everyone would have stopped to help. He took her offered hand, struck by how small it felt in his, yet how capable. "Safe journey to Helena, Miss Stewart." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, and Cole felt an unexpected reluctance to part ways. He told himself it was merely concern for her safety, a lone woman on the dangerous trail north, but something deeper nagged at him, something he couldn't or wouldn't name. With a final tip of his hat, Cole turned midnight south toward Cottonwood Creek and the waiting job. He didn't look back, though he listened to the creak of wagon wheels and the soft commands Josephine gave her team until the sounds faded into the vastness of the Montana morning. The trail to Cottonwood Creek should have taken 3 days, but an unseasonable cloudburst swelled the creeks, forcing Cole to take a longer route through higher ground. By the time he reached the cattle town, he was a day late, mud-spattered, and in a foul mood. "Hired someone else yesterday," the cattle broker informed him without preamble. "Can't hold these drives for stragglers, Fitzgerald, you know that." Cole swallowed his frustration. "Any other work going?" The broker scratched his graying beard. "Nothing that interests you, though Silas Jensen over at the Mercantile was asking after experienced men for a supply run north. Paying good wages on account of the Blackfoot trouble." "North," Cole repeated. "Where exactly?" "Helena," the man replied. "Got a warehouse there needs restocking before winter sets in. 4-wagon train leaving tomorrow." Cole told himself his sudden interest was purely practical, a well-paying job when he needed one. It had nothing to do with a pair of determined green eyes or the thought of a young woman facing frontier dangers alone. Nothing at all. By noon the next day, Cole had signed on as guard and scout for Jensen's supply train. 4 heavily laden wagons carried everything from winter staples to mining equipment bound for Helena's thriving businesses. Besides Cole, the party consisted of 8 men, Jensen himself, 5 teamsters and 2 additional guards, all armed and wary of the increasing tensions with the Blackfoot in the Northern Territories. The journey proved arduous from the start. Recent rains had left trails muddy and treacherous, slowing their progress to a frustrating crawl. Cole rode ahead each day, scouting the path and watching for signs of trouble. At night he took his turn at watch, his thoughts inevitably drifting to Josephine. Had she reached Helena safely? Had her uncle welcomed her as promised? Was she now ensconced in some comfortable home, teaching proper Boston manners to frontier children? It was during his watch on the 5th night, as the supply train camped alongside Wilson Creek, that Cole heard a familiar name. "Poor Stewart girl," one of the teamsters was saying as he poured coffee near the fire. "Shame what happened." Cole's attention sharpened instantly. He moved closer to the fire circle, pretending interest in the coffee. "What Stewart girl?" he asked, keeping his voice casual. The teamster Donovan, a garrulous man with a perpetual 3-day beard, looked up. "Young woman headed to Helena. Wagon was found abandoned about 20 miles north of here 3 days ago." Trading post owner at Elk Fork said she'd stopped there, mentioned having an uncle in Helena. Cole felt his heart pound against his ribs. Did they find her? Donovan shook his head. No body if that's what you're asking. But her things were scattered all about, Blackfoot sign everywhere, most figure they took her. Or worse, added another teamster grimly. Cole's mind raced. 3 days ago, just days after they'd parted ways. If Josephine had made good time, she would have been well north of Wilson Creek by then. The timing matched. This trading post at Elk Fork, he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. How far off our route is it? Not far. Maybe 4 or 5 miles east of where we'll pass tomorrow. Donovan studied him curiously. You knew her. Helped her with a broken wheel south of here, Cole admitted. She was traveling alone. Jensen, who had been listening silently, shook his head. Foolishness, woman that young shouldn't be out here without protection. He fixed Cole with a shrewd gaze. Don't go getting ideas, Fitzgerald. We're on a schedule and the Blackfoot don't leave captives alive for long. Cole said nothing, but his decision was already made. When the camp settled for the night, he approached Jensen privately. I need to verify if it's the same woman, he explained. I'm asking for a detour to Elk Fork tomorrow. The older man studied him thoughtfully. She must have made quite an impression in that short meeting. It's not that, Cole protested, though something inside him whispered that it was precisely that. No one else is looking for her. She mentioned an uncle in Helena, but who knows if he's even expecting her. Jensen sighed heavily. We can spare half a day, no more. These supplies are needed in Helena, and I've got contracts to fulfill. It was enough. Cole nodded his thanks and retreated to his bedroll, though sleep eluded him. He kept seeing Josephine's face in the firelight, hearing her voice as she declared she'd rather face honest dangers than live in a gilded cage. Had those dangers found her so quickly after their paths had diverged? The Elk Fork trading post proved to be little more than a sturdy log structure with a corral for livestock and a single outbuilding that served as home to the proprietor and his wife. The man, Hobson, confirmed what Cole had feared. The abandoned wagon had indeed belonged to Josephine Stewart. Pretty young thing, Hobson recalled, spoke real proper, said she was heading to her uncle's place in Helena. Bought supplies, asked about the trail conditions, and was on her way. And the Blackfoot signs, Cole pressed, you're certain? Hobson's wife, a thin woman with prematurely gray hair, interjected, weren't just signs. Scouting party from Fort Benton found tracks leading northeast. Said it looked like 3, maybe 4 warriors. They followed a ways but lost the trail in the rocky country near Eagle Butte. Any search parties? Cole asked, already knowing the answer. Hobson snorted. For one woman. Armies stretched thin as it is. They sent word to Helena in case someone there was expecting her, but, he shrugged eloquently. Cole felt a cold determination settle in his chest. I need to know exactly where the wagon was found and which direction those tracks led. By midday he had his answer and a crude map sketched by Hobson. Jensen, true to his word, had waited, but his patience was clearly wearing thin. This is as far as my generosity extends, Fitzgerald, he said as Cole prepared to depart. You go after her now, you're on your own, we continue to Helena. I understand, Cole replied, checking his supplies. He had enough ammunition, 3 days' worth of provisions and his bedroll. It would have to be enough. Donovan approached as Cole tightened Midnight's saddle girth. You're really going after her, alone? Someone has to, Cole answered simply. The teamster studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Reckon so, good luck to you, Fitzgerald. With that, Cole mounted and turned northeast, following the directions Hobson had provided. The supply train continued northwest toward Helena, and soon the sounds of creaking wagons and teamsters' calls faded behind him. As he rode, Cole questioned his own actions. Why was he risking his life for a woman he'd met only briefly? Was it merely guilt that he hadn't insisted on accompanying her further? Or was it something deeper, something about Josephine herself that had wormed its way under his carefully constructed defenses? Whatever the reason, he knew only that he couldn't continue to Helena knowing she might be suffering, might need help that no one else would provide. If that made him a fool, then so be it. Better a fool than a man who turned his back when he could have made a difference. The trail Hobson had described led Cole through increasingly difficult terrain. Eagle Butte rose before him by late afternoon, a stark prominence of layered rock that caught the declining sunlight in bands of red and gold. The land here was wilder, less traveled, with scattered pine forests giving way to rocky highlands where a rider could be observed for miles or ambushed without warning. Cole proceeded with caution, dismounting frequently to examine the ground for signs of passage. The Blackfoot were skilled at concealing their movements, but 3 riders with a captive would leave marks that an experienced eye could detect. By sunset, he had found what he sought, a partial hoofprint in soft earth near a creek bed, followed by the barest impression of a moccasin where someone had dismounted. He made a cold camp that night, unwilling to risk a fire that might announce his presence. As he lay beneath the vast canopy of stars, Cole found himself speaking silently to Josephine, wherever she might be. "Hold on," he told her. "I'm coming." Morning brought low clouds and a biting wind from the north, the first herald of the coming winter. Cole continued tracking, finding occasional signs that confirmed he was following the right path. By midday, he spotted smoke rising from a sheltered ravine ahead, thin and almost invisible against the gray sky. Approaching with extreme caution, Cole left midnight secured in a stand of pines and proceeded on foot. The ravine opened into a small protected valley where a single tipi stood beside a small fire. 3 horses grazed nearby, and Cole counted 2 figures moving around the encampment, both male, both armed. There was no sign of Josephine, but Cole's gut told him she was here. The Blackfoot raiding party had clearly separated from their main group, perhaps planning to rejoin them later. This might be his only chance. He watched for hours, studying the patterns of movement, waiting for the right moment. When one warrior left to check their horses and the other disappeared inside the tipi, Cole made his move, approaching the camp from downwind with his rifle ready. He was within 20 yards when the tipi flap opened and the warrior emerged with Josephine. She was alive, though her dress was torn and dirty, her face smudged with grime. Her hands were bound before her and the warrior pulled her roughly toward the fire. Cole's finger tensed on the trigger, but he forced himself to wait. Both warriors needed to be in his sights before he acted. One wrong move could cost Josephine her life. The second warrior returned from tending the horses and Cole had his opportunity. He sighted carefully, exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the valley like thunder. The warrior nearest Josephine fell instantly. Before the echo had died, Cole worked the lever action and fired again, but the second warrior was already moving, dragging Josephine with him toward the cover of the tipi. Cole sprinted forward, firing twice more to force the warrior to keep his head down. He reached the edge of the camp just as the warrior emerged from behind the tipi, using Josephine as a shield, a knife at her throat. "Stop!" Cole shouted, raising his rifle. "Let her go." The warrior's face remained impassive, but his grip on Josephine tightened. Her eyes, wild with fear and hope, found Cole's across the clearing. "Cole," she gasped, and something in the way she said his name, the recognition, the relief, steeled his resolve. "You understand English," Cole said to the warrior, noting the man's reaction. "I'm not here for trouble, just the woman. Let her go, and I'll leave you be." The warrior's eyes flickered between Cole and the fallen companion. His knife remained steady at Josephine's throat. "Trade," he said finally, "woman for horses." Cole nodded slowly. "2 horses. But I see she's unharmed first." The negotiation that followed was tense, conducted in broken English and gestures. In the end, Cole agreed to leave both his horse and one of the Blackfoot horses in exchange for Josephine. It was steep, but he would gladly have paid 10 times that price. When the warrior finally released her, cutting her bonds but maintaining his grip on her arm, Cole's heart hammered against his ribs. "Show me she's unharmed," he insisted. The warrior pushed Josephine forward. She stumbled slightly but remained upright, her eyes never leaving Cole's face. Beyond the dirt and exhaustion, she appeared physically uninjured. "Are you hurt?" Cole asked her directly. She shook her head. "No, they didn't harm me." Relief flooded through Cole. He gestured toward the horses. "Take them and go," he told the warrior. "We'll walk away." The exchange was completed with tense efficiency. As the warrior mounted and departed with both horses, leading his fallen companion's mount as well, Cole quickly gathered what supplies he could from the camp: a blanket, a water skin, some dried meat. Only when the warrior had disappeared over the ridge did Cole finally turn his full attention to Josephine. She stood where he had left her, trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. Without thinking, Cole crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, her composure finally breaking as sobs racked her slender frame. "You came," she whispered against his chest. "How did you find me?" "Long story," he murmured into her hair, allowing himself to acknowledge how perfectly she fit against him. "But we need to move, he might return with others." They gathered what they could carry and set off immediately, heading west toward the main trail to Helena. Without horses, the journey would be arduous, but Cole estimated they could reach a settlement or trading post within 2 or 3 days if they pushed hard. As they walked, Josephine told him what had happened. She had been ambushed shortly after leaving the Elk Fork trading post. The warriors had taken her wagon's team but kept her alive, seemingly planning to trade her to their main group further north. She had heard enough of their conversations to understand they considered her valuable. White women were sometimes ransomed back to settlements or forts. "I tried to escape the first night," she admitted. "That's why my dress is torn. The older one caught me and," she shuddered, "he didn't hurt me, but he made it clear what would happen if I tried again." Cole's jaw tightened. "You're safe now," he said, more fiercely than he had intended. She glanced up at him, a question in her eyes. "Why did you come after me?" It was the question Cole had been asking himself for days. He could have offered practical reasons, common decency, frontier honor, the code of the West that said you didn't abandon those in need. But standing there with Josephine, her face tilted up to his, dirt-smudged and exhausted yet somehow more beautiful than he remembered, only the truth would do. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you," he admitted. "Because the thought of continuing on to Helena not knowing what had happened to you was," he faltered, unused to expressing such feelings, "it wasn't something I could live with." Something shifted in Josephine's expression, surprise melting into a softer emotion that Cole dared not name. Before she could respond, however, the distant sound of hoofbeats brought them both to alert. "Quickly," Cole urged, pulling her toward a dense thicket of juniper, "stay down and quiet." They huddled in the concealing vegetation as 4 riders passed less than 100 yards away, the warrior Cole had negotiated with, now accompanied by 3 others. They were tracking, following the obvious trail Cole and Josephine had left in their hasty departure. "They'll find us," Josephine whispered, fear edging her voice. Cole's mind raced. They couldn't outrun mounted warriors and he had limited ammunition. Their only hope was to reach terrain too difficult for horses before they were discovered. "There," he murmured, pointing to a rocky outcropping that rose from the prairie about half a mile ahead. "If we can reach those rocks, we might find a defensible position." They moved as quickly as stealth would allow, using every bit of cover the landscape provided. The warriors, having lost their trail temporarily, had spread out in a search pattern that took them gradually closer to Cole and Josephine's position. They were still 100 yards from the rocky sanctuary when a shout went up. "They'd been spotted. Run," Cole commanded, grabbing Josephine's hand. "Don't stop for anything." They sprinted across the open ground, Cole's longer legs slowing to match Josephine's pace. Behind them, the thunder of hooves grew louder as the warriors closed the distance. Cole's lungs burned, and he could hear Josephine's labored breathing beside him, but neither slowed. The rocks loomed before them, promising shelter if they could only reach them in time. 50 yards, 30, 20. A rifle shot cracked overhead and Cole instinctively pulled Josephine lower. They reached the first tumble of boulders just as another shot kicked up dirt at their heels. Scrambling upward, they found a narrow passage between 2 massive rocks and squeezed through, emerging onto a small plateau studded with wind-sculpted stone formations. "Keep going," Cole urged, guiding Josephine toward a natural hollow where 2 slabs of rock had fallen together, creating a V-shaped shelter. "Get in there." She obeyed without question as Cole positioned himself at the entrance, rifle ready. The warriors had reached the base of the outcropping but hesitated to follow on foot, clearly wary of the tactical advantage the high ground provided. "How many bullets do you have?" Josephine asked from behind him. 8 in the rifle, 12 in my belt," Cole answered without turning, enough to make them think twice. As if to punctuate his point, he fired a warning shot that struck rock just above the warrior's position, sending chips flying. The response was immediate. The warriors retreated to a safe distance, conferring among themselves. "What will they do?" Josephine moved closer to peer over Cole's shoulder. "Wait us out, most likely," he replied grimly. "They know we have limited supplies." Night fell with excruciating slowness. The warriors maintained their vigil at the base of the rocks, occasionally firing upward more to remind Cole and Josephine of their presence than in any real attempt to hit them. Cole rationed their meager supplies, a few strips of dried meat and half a water skin between them. "I'm sorry," Josephine said softly as darkness enveloped them, "if I hadn't been so stubborn, insisting on traveling alone." "Don't," Cole interrupted. "You couldn't have known." They huddled together for warmth as the temperature dropped, the single blanket Cole had taken from the camp wrapped around them both. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of their situation, Cole found himself acutely aware of Josephine's closeness. The scent of her hair, the warmth of her body pressed against his side, the trust implicit in the way she leaned into him. "Tell me about your uncle in Helena," he said, partly to distract them both from their predicament and partly because he genuinely wanted to know more about her. Josephine shifted slightly. "He's not really my uncle," she admitted quietly. "He was my father's friend, not his brother. I have no family left. When father died, I wrote to everyone I could think of who might help, Mr. Norwood was the only one who responded. "So you left everything you knew to come to a place you've never seen, to stay with a man you barely remember, on nothing more than the hope he'd help you." Cole couldn't hide the admiration in his voice. "What choice did I have?" She looked up at him, her face barely visible in the darkness. "Stay in Boston and marry a man I despised? Become a servant in a house where I had once been a guest? At least here I have a chance at something different, something that's mine." Her courage humbled him. Cole had always thought himself brave for facing the frontier's dangers, but Josephine's brand of courage, the willingness to leap into the unknown rather than accept a life that diminished her, seemed far greater. "We'll get you to Helena," he promised, somehow. She was silent for a long moment, and then. The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Cole had never allowed himself to consider and then before. His life had been a succession of temporary arrangements, jobs taken and completed, places visited and left behind. The future had always been as formless as the horizon. But now, with Josephine beside him, and then suddenly seemed to matter. Before he could answer, a sound from below caught his attention, horses moving out. Cole carefully peered over their rocky shelter and saw two of the warriors riding away, heading east. "What's happening?" Josephine whispered. "They're splitting up," Cole replied, brow furrowed. "Two staying, two leaving. Going for reinforcements. Possibly, or they might be giving up, figuring we're not worth the trouble," but Cole doubted it. The Blackfoot were patient hunters, not easily discouraged. More likely, the departing warriors were circling around to approach from another direction, hoping to catch them unawares. "We need to move," he decided. "Under cover of darkness, before they have us completely surrounded." Gathering their meager possessions, they crept from their shelter and began picking their way across the rocky outcropping, moving west and slightly north. The moon, just past full, provided enough light to see by while still offering some concealment in the shadows. Every step had to be taken with extreme care to avoid dislodging rocks that might alert the warriors below. They had made it perhaps halfway across the plateau when a rifle shot shattered the night's silence. Cole pulled Josephine down behind a boulder as more shots followed, coming from the direction they had been heading. "They did circle around," he muttered. "We're caught between them." Josephine's hand found his in the darkness, squeezing tight. "What do we do?" Cole assessed their options grimly. They could try to break through in either direction, but without knowing exactly where all the warriors were positioned, it would be a deadly gamble. They could retreat to their previous shelter, but that merely delayed the inevitable. Or, his gaze followed the slope of the plateau to where it descended westward in a series of steep, broken ledges. In daylight, it would be a treacherous climb. In darkness, it was potentially suicidal, but it was also their best chance. "We're going down the west face," he told her. "It's steep, but if we're careful and quiet, we might make it before they realize we've moved." Josephine nodded, trust evident in the firm set of her jaw. Lead the way. The descent was harrowing. Every handhold had to be tested, every footstep placed with deliberate care. Cole went first, finding the path and then helping Josephine follow. More than once, loose rock clattered down the slope beneath them, freezing them in place as they waited to see if the sound had been detected. They were perhaps two-thirds of the way down when Josephine's foot slipped on a moss-covered ledge. Cole lunged to catch her, managing to grasp her arm before she fell, but the sudden movement caused him to lose his own balance. Together, they slid and tumbled the remaining distance, coming to rest in a bruised, breathless heap at the base of the rocks. "Are you all right?" Cole gasped, frantically checking Josephine for injuries in the dim light. "I think so," she answered shakily, "just scraped and bruised." Above them, shouts indicated the warriors had heard their fall and were converging on the western edge of the plateau. There was no time to recover, they had to move immediately. Hand in hand, they ran into the darkness, heading west across the open prairie. Behind them, more shouts and the sounds of pursuit drove them forward despite exhaustion and pain. Cole knew their only hope was to reach the main trail to Helena, where they might encounter other travelers or a patrol from Fort Benton. They ran until their legs gave out, then walked, then ran again when they heard hoofbeats in the distance. The night seemed endless, a nightmare of flight and fear punctuated by moments of desperate hope when the sounds of pursuit faded, only to return again. Dawn broke with cruel clarity, revealing their exposed position on the rolling prairie. No cover, no place to hide, and behind them, dust rising from riders still doggedly tracking them. "Cole," Josephine said, her voice ragged with exhaustion, "I can't." He turned to find her swaying on her feet, face pale beneath the dirt and scratches. Without a word, he swept her into his arms and continued walking, pushing his protesting muscles beyond endurance through sheer force of will. "Put me down," she protested weakly. "You can't carry me." "Watch me," he grunted, adjusting her weight in his arms. He had managed perhaps half a mile in this fashion when the sound he had been dreading reached his ears, hoofbeats approaching rapidly from behind. Cole gently set Josephine on her feet and turned to face their pursuers, rifle ready for one final stand. But the riders that crested the ridge behind them were not Blackfoot warriors. Instead, Cole saw the unmistakable blue uniforms of U.S. cavalry soldiers, a patrol of 8 men led by a young lieutenant. "Hold there," the officer called as they approached, rifles at the ready. Cole nearly wept with relief. "American citizens," he shouted back, being pursued by Blackfoot raiders. The patrol reached them moments later, the lieutenant eyeing them with a mixture of suspicion and concern. "Lieutenant Thomas Wells, Fort Benton." "Identify yourselves." Cole quickly explained their situation, including the 4 warriors who had been pursuing them. The lieutenant dispatched 4 of his men to investigate while the others provided Cole and Josephine with water and helped them mount behind 2 of the soldiers. "We've been tracking increased Blackfoot activity in this area for days," Wells explained as they rode west. "Had reports of a woman taken. I take it that was you, miss." Josephine nodded wearily from her position behind a grizzled sergeant. "Yes, Mr. Fitzgerald rescued me." The lieutenant glanced at Cole with new respect. Brave act, taking on Blackfoot warriors alone. Cole merely nodded, too exhausted for conversation. All that mattered was that Josephine was safe. They had survived. The cavalry patrol escorted them to a small settlement called Riverton, a day's ride from Helena. There, the local doctor examined them, treating Josephine's cuts and bruises and binding Cole's ribs, which had been badly bruised in their fall down the rocks. "You both need rest," the doctor advised, "a few days at minimum before continuing your journey." They were given a room at the settlement's only boarding house, separate rooms, propriety maintained despite their ordeal. That evening, washed and bandaged and fed a proper meal, Cole sat on the porch while Josephine rested upstairs. Lieutenant Wells joined him, offering a flask of whiskey. "Patrol returned," he reported. "Found signs of the warriors, but they've moved north, back toward their territory." Cole accepted the flask gratefully. Good news. "There's a stage to Helena day after tomorrow," Wells continued. "I've arranged passage for both of you. No charge." "Appreciate that." The lieutenant studied him thoughtfully. "Mind if I ask a personal question, Fitzgerald?" Cole shrugged. "What's your relationship to Miss Stewart? You two married?"
Engaged.
Neither, Cole replied, taking another sip of whiskey. Met her on the trail when her wagon broke down, helped her fix it, and we parted ways. Heard about the attack later and went looking for her. Wells's eyebrows rose. You risked your life for a woman you barely knew. Put that way, it did sound foolish. Yet Cole couldn't bring himself to regret his decision, not when it had led to Josephine's safety. Sometimes you just know what's right, he said finally. The lieutenant nodded slowly. Fair enough. He reclaimed his flask and stood. Get some rest, Fitzgerald, you've earned it. Sleep came swiftly that night, but Cole's dreams were troubled, visions of Josephine in danger, always just beyond his reach. He awakened with her name on his lips, the pre-dawn light barely filtering through the thin curtains. Unable to return to sleep, he dressed and made his way downstairs. To his surprise, Josephine was already in the small dining room, a cup of coffee before her, staring out the window at the sleeping settlement. You should be resting, he said as he joined her. She offered a tired smile. So should you, but it seems neither of us is very good at following doctor's orders. Cole poured himself coffee from the pot left warming on the stove. Lieutenant Wells says there's a stage to Helena tomorrow. He's arranged our passage. Our passage, Josephine repeated, something hopeful in her tone. You're continuing to Helena. I have business there, Cole said, which wasn't entirely untrue. The Jensen supply train would have reached Helena by now, and he had unfinished business with the merchant. And I promised to see you safely to Mr. Norwood's door. She studied him over the rim of her cup. And then? There it was again, that simple question that somehow encompassed all the uncertainty, all the possibility that had grown between them. And then, I don't know, he admitted. I haven't thought that far ahead. But it wasn't true. In the quiet hours of the night, in the desperate moments of their flight, Cole had thought of little else. He had thought of Josephine's courage, her determination, her refusal to accept a life she didn't want. He had thought of how it felt to hold her, to protect her, to be the one she trusted when all seemed lost. He had thought of a life beyond the endless drifting, a life with purpose beyond the next job or the next town. What do you want, Cole? Josephine asked softly. It was the first time she had used his given name without the formality of Mr. Fitzgerald, and something in the way she said it, intimate, almost tender, broke through his carefully maintained reserve. He began, then faltered. How could he explain what he scarcely understood himself? I've spent my life believing the frontier was no place for connections, that a man survived out here by depending only on himself. But these past days, he met her eyes directly, these past days have shown me I was wrong. Josephine reached across the table to take his hand. When you found me, when you came for me despite all reasons saying you should have continued on your way, that was the moment I knew there was more goodness in this world than I had dared to believe. Cole turned his hand to clasp hers. I don't have much to offer. No land, no house, just my word and whatever future I can build. I don't need much, she replied, just the freedom to choose my own path and perhaps, she hesitated, a blush coloring her cheeks. Perhaps someone to walk it with me. The stage arrived in Helena 2 days later, carrying Cole and Josephine into the bustling mining town just as afternoon shadows lengthened across the main street. Mr. Norwood, alerted by telegraph of Josephine's ordeal and imminent arrival, was waiting at the stage office, a barrel-chested man with kind eyes and a worried expression that dissolved into relief when he spotted her. Josephine, my dear girl, he exclaimed, helping her down from the stage. When I heard what happened, my wife and I have been sick with worry. Introductions were made, gratitude expressed, and arrangements confirmed. Yes, Josephine would still be welcome as governess to the Norwood children. Yes, she would have her own room in their substantial home. Yes, Mr. Norwood was deeply indebted to Cole for his heroic rescue. You must stay with us as well, Mr. Fitzgerald, Mrs. Norwood insisted when they reached the Norwood residence, a handsome 2-story home near the edge of town, at least until you've fully recovered from your injuries. Cole accepted the invitation, telling himself it was practical to have a place to stay while he sought out Jensen and determined if there was still work to be had. But in truth, he wasn't ready to part from Josephine just yet, not until they had properly discussed what had begun between them. That opportunity came 3 days later. Cole had located Jensen, who, impressed by Cole's loyalty in pursuing Josephine, offered him a position managing security for his Helena warehouse, a good job with steady pay. The bruises were healing, the exhaustion fading, and the time had come for decisions. Cole found Josephine in the Norwood's garden, supervising the youngest child as he played with blocks on a blanket spread beneath an apple tree. She looked up as Cole approached, her smile warming him more than the autumn sunshine. "Mr. Norwood says you've been offered a position with Jensen," she said. Cole nodded, taking a seat beside her on the garden bench. "Good work, steady, here in Helena. And will you take it?" He studied her face, healthier now, the scrapes healing, the color returned to her cheeks. She was even more beautiful than he had first thought, not just in feature but in spirit. The determined young woman who had faced down frontier dangers rather than accept a life not of her choosing had captured something in him he hadn't known existed. "That depends," he said carefully, "on whether there's a reason for me to stay in Helena." Josephine's gaze dropped to her hands folded neatly in her lap. "The Norwoods are kind employers, the children are sweet. I could be content here." "Content," Cole repeated, "is that enough?" She looked up then, her green eyes meeting his directly. "No, not anymore, not after what we've been through together." Cole reached for her hand, his calloused fingers engulfing her smaller ones. "What do you want, Josephine?" "I want what I've always wanted," she answered, "freedom to choose my own path, but now," she squeezed his hand, "now I know who I want beside me on that path. Even if that someone is just a drifting cowboy with nothing to his name but a job offer and the clothes on his back." "That just a cowboy risked everything to save me," she countered. "That says more about his character than any amount of property or possessions ever could." Cole felt something tight in his chest finally loosen, a knot of loneliness and doubt that had been there so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to be without it. In its place bloomed a warmth, a certainty that had eluded him his entire adult life. "I love you, Josephine Stewart," he said simply. "I think I started loving you the moment you told me you'd rather face honest dangers than live in a gilded cage. I didn't know what it meant then, but I do now." Tears welled in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. "And I love you, Cole Fitzgerald, more than I thought possible in so short a time." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church near the Norwood home. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by the Norwoods, Jensen and his wife, and a handful of others Cole had come to know through his new position. As winter settled over Helena, Cole and Josephine established themselves in a small but comfortable house not far from the warehouse. With his steady income and her position with the Norwoods, they were able to save toward a dream that had formed during their long conversations by the fire, a small ranch of their own someday, where they could build something lasting together. One evening in early December, as snow fell gently outside their window, Cole watched Josephine working at her sewing. The firelight caught the gold in her hair and highlighted the gentle curve of her cheek. Contentment filled him, a feeling so unfamiliar he was still learning to recognize it. "What are you thinking?" she asked, catching his gaze. "That I was wrong," he replied, "about the frontier being no place for connections. For love." Josephine set aside her work and moved to join him by the fire, settling naturally into the circle of his arms. "We all have beliefs that protect us until we're ready for something more," she said wisely. "I believed I had to face everything alone because trusting others had only brought disappointment. And now," he murmured into her hair, "now I know that trust given to the right person isn't weakness but strength." She tilted her face up to his. "Just as you've learned that love doesn't make the frontier more dangerous, it makes the dangers worthwhile." As Cole lowered his lips to hers, he marveled at the journey that had brought them here, from a chance meeting on a dusty trail to this moment of perfect belonging. When he had stopped to help a stranded traveler, he could never have imagined he was finding the greatest treasure of his life. Not gold, not land, not the elusive fortune so many sought in the West, but something far more precious and enduring, a love worth more than 1,000 riches, a love that had transformed his understanding of what it meant to truly live in this wild, beautiful, dangerous land they now called home.